Greetings and welcome to An American Deception. I'm your host, Tavis Sanders, also known as Red Tail Hawk. I'd like to welcome our co-host, Renee Sanders, also known as Red Silver Fox.
Greetings, everyone.
All right, welcome to another edition of An American Deception. Today's topic will be genocide and Native Americans. And so before we begin, I think that we should just give the audience the definition of genocide so they have a starting point. And so I'm going to give you two definitions. The first is going to be from Merriam-Webster, and it's going to state genocide is the deliberate and systematic destruction of a racial, political, or cultural group. And we have another one from Oxford Dictionary, and it states the deliberate killing of a large group of people, especially those of a particular ethnic group or nation. And so, that's the basic definition of genocide. And so the term was coined in 1944 by a Polish-born U.S. jurist named Ralph Lemkin, and in a book that he wrote called Axis Rule in Occupied Europe. And so, I guess that's where we can begin.
Okay, and that's interesting that this term really didn't come about until the 1940s. I do know that he was doing some studying, and he was really basing some of his information on the Armenians in 1915, as a matter of fact. And that was what he was originally doing his studying about genocide, the Armenians. And
well, I know that he created the term, or he was the one that was famous for putting the term to use when he was doing some work with Armenian and Nazi, not necessarily slaves, but genocide that was happening by the Armenians and the Nazis against the Jews in '44.
Yes.
So
that's correct.
when did the term become legal? When did the term became a part of law?
Okay, well, as a matter of fact, there's a convention on the prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide, which is Article 2, which was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in December of 1948. However, the convention entered it into force in January of 1951. So in actuality, it did not enter into force until 1951. And they defined it in legal terms and listing basically 5 categories that are considered to be genocide. They are killing members of a group, causing serious bodily harm or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. And according to law, those are the 5 things that define genocide.
Okay. Well, so let's start from there. So now we have a basic definition. We have the general definition, the layman's term definition, and then more of an international legal definition for the term genocide. And again, but it started in the 40s and it became law in the early 1950s.
Yes, correct, yes.
And so I know that I was reading that it became the de facto paradigm, meaning that although genocide may have occurred previously, that they're not going to count anything except from this date forward.
And that was with the Holocaust?
That was with the Jewish Holocaust and during the World War II. Yeah. So now, when I think of the definitions of the terms, I think of what happened to the Native Americans, because I know a lot of the tactics that were used by the Nazis already had been used on the Native American population. And so when I hear the definition, especially the international definition, I think about us as a people, the Native Americans. However, based on law, because it didn't start until 1940s, we can't argue that point as far as us as a people and what happened to us for the past 400 or 500 years here.
Right, and as far as legal remedies are concerned?
Yes. So we're not allowed to take the United States for court for genocide against us, although we're going to show today how the term can definitely relate to what happened to us during the colonial periods.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yes.
You want to start there? Okay, so let's talk about, well, you know what, before we start going into that, it's stated that that genocide had two elements, which is very important, and had intent and then is action. And so it could, if you didn't have the intent to wipe out a people, and it just happened, like things happen in war, is they wouldn't necessarily classify it as genocide. It has to have both intent and action. You know, again, you know, like the definition stated, the deliberate and systematic. And so it has to be both deliberate and systematic, you know, intent and action in order for it to qualify as genocide. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to show people that they systematically, you know, attempted to wipe the Native Americans out of existence. And maybe we could talk about some of the reasons why. The laws of genocide protects certain groups of people. And so before we went into the techniques, we just wanted to make sure that they understood the four groups that the law protects as far as genocide is concerned. And the four groups are national groups, ethnical groups, racial groups, and religious groups. And so, you know, the Jewish people definitely fall into that category with the Holocaust that happened in the 1940s, and Native Americans definitely fall into that category, although it predates the term genocide becoming a part of law.
Right, and as a matter of fact, when Lemkin, when he was doing his work, he identified 8 different techniques that were used. And he found that not only were these techniques used on the European Jews, but they were also used on a number of different groups in territories that were also occupied by the Nazis. So not just the European Jews, but also the territories that were occupied by the Nazis.
Okay, so they were doing this everywhere, basically. Okay, so let's talk about the first technique. Did you want me to read it and then want to have a small discussion?
Okay, well, I can read the first one here.
Okay.
And the first one that is listed is political. And it says, self-government and local rule of the victim group are replaced by the government of the occupier. Reminders of former national character of the target group are obliterated.
Well, okay, so now let's relate that to the Native American population. That's not a far reach. I don't think that's a far reach, but let's just give an example.
Okay, well, the governments, they of all the different tribes, and there were many tribes that were here, and however, once the Europeans came in, that was something that they attacked, and initially.
The chiefdoms.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, the Native Americans had different chiefdoms, which would be basically a political body.
Oh yes, most definitely. Yes, and there was a hierarchy, and they recognized that there was a political system amongst these people, and so again, attacking that system and breaking it down. So as a matter of fact, by the time the 1600s come around, these chiefdoms are no longer there. Right,
and so now they replace it with the government that was being established, the United States government, and so, you know, even to today, you know, the tribal governments have what they consider limited sovereignty, where, you know, we're not allowed to operate autonomously. You know, we have to have some kind of influence by the United States government, and that is definitely a part of what would be considered political genocide.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Well, we're going to continue on in a few minutes with some more techniques, and we'll be right back.
Recitation Life, the Southern Culture. We are pure energy, a single thought manifesting with double movement in the cosmos. We are kin to the ethers, the fire, the air, wind, the water, and the earth. We are conceived within the cycles of time within this universe. With the turn of time we manifest, brought through by the nature of and for this planet. Our essence has grown from the water and soil of Ammatum, our mother. Our essence is shared among many, stemming from the branches of a great tree that sprung forth from this land. Our branches extend, and our foliage continues to spread like a canopy across this land now called America. We are the Southern Cult. We are Indigenous.
استربال هيوه الجنوبتين دوت إنن أدى خلوص نشد واحد بزون هادور دشو كار زدوك حروك منت في النزوم إنن أدى أقربات إلى الأدير النعور الهوه ريوه المويا والأرض إنن كلانا موليد كار في الدور شيل وقوت في المجرق أن كار في الدور شيل وقوت إنن موليد جانبا بوساتي بالتبوه شيل ولهذا خوخوب مهونا غدالا من مويا والأرض شيل أمتم كمتنا مهونا كالون شاروك وستا كاتور شيل الزيرواد شيل كابور شجورون دي كالون هادور داشو من هذا أرض زيروادنا مدود وأروكنا يشوب لي نقو بخوز مدو زاروغون على هذا أرض حصا ندو أمريكي إنن أثا ندايا الجنوبتين أدوت إنن أثا مهالوس راموس
Welcome back to An American Deception, Genocide and Native Americans. Before we left off, we were talking about political genocide and some of the things and how it could relate to what happened to the indigenous or to the native population. And so we want to begin there. And the next technique is there are 8 techniques that are identified. The next technique is the social. And so I'll read it to you. Okay? And it says, social genocide. Attacks are geared to weaken the national or spiritual resources. This involves attacks against the intelligentsia of the victim group. Excuse me. And just for people to know, intelligentsia means intellectuals or highly educated people as a group, especially when regarding as possessing culture and political influence. So the educated of the people, you know.
And again, with the chiefdoms, you know, there were elites, and however, basically those were the chiefs, and there were, you had main chiefs, you had secondary chiefs, and there were other chiefs, you know, so there was an entire system that was set up with the indigenous people here. And again, those were some of the things that they attacked, and a lot of those tactics even began on the islands with Christopher Columbus when he first arrived here. And as a matter of fact, that is one way that he was able to subjugate the people on the islands, and that was by attacking the chiefs first. One of the first chiefs that was attacked was a chief who they tricked into putting on some handcuffs because he liked shiny things, and they tricked him into putting on handcuffs. And it said that then they marched him on to the boat, and he was on one of the first boats that left from the islands to go back to Spain that had over 500 indigenous people there that they were enslaving.
Mm-hmm. I know that they also would take the children of the elite and supposedly to take them to school, but in actuality they would do something else with them or re-educate them to fit the model that they were looking for, and as far as what they wanted for the Americas.
Yes, and yes, they were doing that, and they were also subjugating the people of the islands, you know, and many of them, if they didn't capture them to enslave them, many of them got tortured. Some of them were tricked into going into a one time they tricked about 80 different chiefs, where they brought them all together. It was supposed to be a celebration for the Spaniards. However, once all the chiefs were in this one building, they set the building on fire and burned them all alive. And so it took about 10 years, but by the time about the 10 years between 1492 and 1502, the 5 main chiefs, all of them were gone, and the islands by that time were totally subjugated under the Spanish rule.
Right, and so that definitely would classify what was going on with the Native Americans underneath this term genocide.
Oh yes, and those tactics of course continued on to the mainland. Right. Once they left the islands.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, and so now that's the first two. We have political and social. And so the next technique is cultural. And so I just want to just give you a quick overview of what it says for culture. Bans are placed on using victim groups' language in education. Policies and programs may be put in place to inoculate target group youth through propaganda and restricting Native education. And so that's a really big thing.
Oh yes, and again, this started as soon as they arrived here, and as you mentioned, many of the children of the chiefs, because they were considered the elites, and they would take their children, and originally they were taking them to Cuba, and under the guise of educating them in their language, so that they would be able to communicate and bring the language back to the chief so that they could then teach everyone else the languages and everything. However, in actuality, what they were doing is that they were really stripping them of and taking them away from the things that were part of their culture.
Yeah, you could even go as far as the paganism that they were saying that Native Americans were practicing, and the things that would occur by labeling a group of people that, you know, lynching, burnings, killings, or, you know, and everything was considered to be okay because of the label that they had, because they were practicing a culture or a religion or some kind of spiritual ceremony that was different from, you know, the new Americans coming in.
Yes, and many times they were punished for practicing these things, and they were punished, and so with them being punished for doing some of the ritual things, then again this was them stripping them of their ceremonies, their culture, and just very slowly and methodically taking those things away from the indigenous people. Okay,
and so I'm just gonna go over the list so that we can make sure people at least get the 8 techniques, and then we'll go back and keep going over them to make sure we have enough time for the people. And so the next ones are economic, biological, physical, religious, and moral. And I just wanted to make sure that we could get all of those out for the people before we went back.
Okay.
And so let's go back. Now we're at the economic stage now. And the economic states that resources are shifted from the occupied to the occupier. This does not necessarily result in such extremes as starvation, although it may. The occupier may provide incentives to the target group to renounce their group identification. Members of the indigenous groups may also be penalized by losing property if they persist in identifying themselves with their former group. And that's,
that right there, the loss of their land and their resources.
Right, and our language also.
Oh, yes.
And I mean, they would enslave groups and totally take them away from their land and then sell them, to the new colonizers that would then buy the slaves that may have been on that property so that they could farm with it, so that they could build on it, and so that they would know how to live, because again, these people did not necessarily know how to survive in America when they first came here.
Right, exactly.
So definitely. Now, I have here in my notes that 1700s, British started causing wars with unfriendly tribes, and then I have a land scandal.
Yeah, well, there were so many different tactics that were utilized that robbed the indigenous people of their land.
Well, I mean, even in just to finish at this point, resources are shifted from the occupied to the occupier. We can even talk about the reservation, the Native American reservations today, and how little resources the natives that do reside on these reservations has, unless you have a casino. If you don't have a casino, your resources are very limited on what you and your people can do. And, as far as being able to grow, as far as being able to support, the clan or the tribe itself.
Yes.
So definitely that could fit as far as indigenous or native population is concerned. And, well, just real quick, let's go biological. And biological states that policies are put in place to decrease the birth rate of the occupied group. Marriages may be forbidden and sex is separated. And
yes, okay, and one thing that I would like to point out there is that that it was believed that hybrid races or mixed breed races were being created here in the United States. And
well, you know what? Let's pause there for a moment, and we will get to that after this break.
Okay.
All right.
Yes.
So thank you for staying tuned to An American Deception, and we'll be right back. Greetings and welcome back to An American Deception, Genocide and Native Americans. So before the break, we were talking about biological genocide, and I know you had some things that you wanted to state.
Yes, and we were talking about mixed races, and really it was believed that these mixed races would eventually die out. And that was because hybrids in the plant world, and hybrids are a mixture of two different types of plants or animals, that hybrids do not reproduce very well. So it was believed that the same thing would happen in the humans, in the human race. So it was believed that these mixed races would be fewer in numbers, that they would be less able to continue their race, and less able to adapt to the conditions of existence. So it was really believed that by mixing in these races, that the races would eventually die out. So they did it on both sides. It was done by infiltrating the Native American tribes and marrying into the Native American tribes, and it was also done by infiltrating some of the Native Americans into the slave population. Mm-hmm. So it was done both ways to really, in actuality, to breed them out of existence.
Breed the Native Americans out,
yes,
so that they would have just the two classes people
two classes
here,
of races. Yes,
and then they would be able to control and move forward however they wanted to.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I know we're running out of time, and we had a couple more points that we wanted to get to. We have physical, which is this can mean physical debilitation as well as outright annihilation. And so, we can just stay there. And with the physical part, I just like to state slavery. I mean, there's nothing else that we can restate. What happened to the Native Americans as far as the slave trade was concerned definitely can fall underneath this physical genocide.
Oh yes, most definitely. And we are going to be doing a show in the future about this, So we're just going to go on to the next topic.
Right, okay. And so now we have religious. And occupiers may seek to disrupt the national or religious systems of the occupied people. And I know that happened with the missions. I think it was the Spanish missions a lot of times, right?
Yes. The Spanish missions is really basically where it started, where they were converting the native people to Christianity. Mm-hmm. But the tactics went on during the centuries, and then by the time the 1800s arrived is when they were really actually taking children away from their homes and sending them to boarding schools to teach them European culture, European ways. They stripped them of everything of their culture entirely. They cut their hair, changed their clothes, and just stripped them of anything that would remind them of their native culture.
Right. Okay, so the last one is moral. And the moral says occupiers may work to weaken the spiritual resistance of the national group. This involves diverting a group's mental energies from moral and national thinking to the desire for a cheap individual pleasure, from the group to the self or to the individual. I like to, that's how I kind of look at that.
Yes, and I look at it that, the people even as early as the late 1500s and the early 1600s, they were even becoming aware of how things were being taken away from them and that were mentally breaking them down, morally. As a matter of fact, I have some words from a speech from a Native American chief from the late 1590s, I do believe that it was. And it was stated, "They obstruct our dances, banquets, feasts, celebrations, fires, and wars, so that by failing to use them, we lose the ancient valor and dexterity inherited from our ancestors. They persecute our old people, calling them witches. Even our labor disturbs them. They always reprimand us, injure us, oppress us, preach to us, and call us bad Christians, and deprive us of all happiness which our ancestors enjoyed." Now,
so you said this was from the 1500s?
This is the 1500s, and when I first read that statement, I actually thought that it was much later in time, like maybe the 1800s. So I was really surprised to see when that was in the late 1500s.
Okay. All right. Well, we're coming to the end of our program today, but before we finish, we wanted to just state that there are other very, very important factors with respects to genocide that haven't been discussed. Most importantly, as far as we're concerned, is omission and assimilation. And I hope to be able to get to those shows later where we can actually go into the topic more in depth. What about omission and genocide, and what about assimilation and genocide? And this actually will relate more to us as a people today, and what happened to us. We like to thank you for tuning in. Again, my name is Tyler Sanders, also known as Red Toe Hawk. I'd like to thank our guest, Renee Sanders, also known as Red Silver Fox. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we hope we see you again next time on An American Deception. Peace.
Peace.